Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Greek Community of Melbourne, I respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation and pay respects to the elders past and present and elders from other communities who may be here today. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the annual John Berger Lecture. John is most well known for his art criticism, Ways of Seeing, but A Seventh Man is a book he considers to be most revealing of him. A Seventh Man was a portrayal of the migrant condition. It's on this basis that a community like ours develops an ongoing affinity with his body of work. This initially began as a lecture that was presented as stories, evolved in a conversation between a visual and literary artist, and tonight it's taking a new step, which we're about to witness. A performance of the correspondence between father and son, John and Yves Berger. Now, a little bit about our two guests tonight. Yves Berger is a painter who lives and works in a small mountain village in the French Alps. He grew up amongst the peasants surrounding his home and the many artists regularly visiting his father, John Berger. The specific context is the ground on which his artwork has grown and developed over the last 25 years, questioning human nature within nature itself. He has been using visual mediums such as drawing, painting, monoprint, etching, and sculpture. This sensitive and empiric observation of the world appears in his many writings, might it be his essays or books of poems. His work has been shown in several countries throughout Europe and is held in numerous private collections, including in the USA. In 2001, he was awarded the Stravinsky Prize for painting in Geneva. Welcome to the Greek community to Isaac Klotz. Isaac White Klotz was born in Sydney, Australia. At a few months old, he moved to Sri Lanka, where he attended a French kindergarten until the age of 5. He then moved to a small village in the French Alps, not far from Yves Berger's home. When Isaac and Yves met in the summer of 2021, they soon realised that they had similar interests, including art. In 2002, Isaac worked for Yves, organising letters that John Berger received throughout his career. In the future, Isaac aspires to make art a central activity of his life and one day live from his passion. For now, he's travelling around Australia, working on a few farms. We welcome Isaac to the stage, and please welcome our guests.
Hello. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm very pleased to do this reading with my friend Isaac. And let me just introduce it very briefly. So we're going to read extracts from a book called, in English, Over to You, and in French it's called À ton tour. This is the French edition of it. It first came out in French, and then later on in Turkish, in Korean, and in Spanish, soon in Italian, and next year it will exist in English. It will be published by Pantheon in the States, Knopf edition. We're working to produce that English version of the book. And this book is made of letters my father and I exchanged over 2 years between 2014 and 16. We had great pleasure exchanging those letters. It was amongst the last writings my father wrote, and yeah, they were very meaningful to us, and I hope the same for you now. The lecture will be in 2 parts. We use images because like in the book, we talk of many paintings, and we use reproductions of those artworks. And so you will see on the screen also the paintings we're talking about. And so in between the two parts, there will be a very short break where we'll just let a few drawings speak. We won't speak, but we think that the drawings will speak for themselves. And those drawings are simply portraits Isaac and I did of each other last summer. And then the second part, and at the end of the reading, we also will leave two other drawings speak for themselves. Yeah, I think that's enough for an introduction. So if everybody's ready, we can start. Isaac, that's fine for you?
Yep.
Okay, so let's go. A proposal. Let's take a walk along a border. The border I'm thinking about is hard to name or even to locate. Maybe it's not even a border, but never mind. I'll try to take you there. As I'm writing at the table of this cafe, I'm listening to music. With my headphones on my ears, I can concentrate better. The music helps me to cut off, to withdraw from this place and all its distractions. The music I'm listening to reminds me of Sufi music, such as the singing of Nusrat Fat Ali Khan. A trip. Well, this trip would take us to the border we're aiming for. Are the stars visible these days in the night sky of Paris? If so, look up at them tonight and start thinking. As we all know, but in a very abstract way, that they are mostly suns in other solar systems. But also keep in mind where you are on this specific planet of this specific solar system. Now, wonder about the scale of your life within the scale of life in general. Need a chair? Always better to lie down when looking at stars. Now, you may be getting near the place I would like us to approach. Let's take another vehicle. Both of us have had the experience of drawing in a life class. That's to say, with a model, someone posing naked. And in appearance, before we start really looking, it all seems pretty obvious. We all know what's a human body, male or female. Or do we? The more we look at it and try to draw it, to represent it on the paper, the more we doubt we know what we're looking at. To the point that we forget, must forget, what we thought of as our knowledge in order to face this fascinating mystery. And from there, try to learn again. It's true the human body is a very complex thing. And so this could explain why it remains, or rather becomes, so mysterious when we focus on it. But what about an apple, or the way a coat hangs on a chair? For each of those two, Cézanne and Giacometti have spent a countless amount of time and energy trying to grasp what it means to see clearly. And if you were to ask them, they would both say they have failed. I came out of my mother's body. She came out of her mother's body, and so on. We can look at it from all sides, but there's always something too big for us in life. Too big to be able to think it, to see it, to hear it. And so to be able to carry on from birth to death, we each have to find a way to deal with this too big. And the least we can say is that it's not easy. Maybe especially today in this world that leaves so little space for recognizing this weakness of ours. So much exceeds our understanding. So much remains open in what seems or even is closed. This gap between our consciousness and our feelings, between the visible and invisible, between the said and unsaid, leads to a kind of vertigo. A vertigo that's not far from praying or from madness. That's the zone where I would like us to meet. Are you coming? With love, Yves.
So, here I am with you in the zone which faces the too big. And I've brought with me 2 images, because they have been on my table for months, and I was glancing at them most days. And because they refer, in their own way, to what you are saying. The first is a photo of a plant by Jitka Hanslova, the Czech photographer of forests and horses. This image of a plant, when seeding, is as mysterious and as vast and as humbling as the sight of the stars in a night sky. Don't you think? So physical scale has little to do with the intimidating bigness. What is intimidating is perhaps the endurance involved. The second is a painting we both know so well by Caravaggio. I send it because it depicts exactly that moment of vertigo or prayer which you refer to. St. Paul, if you like, has just looked at the stars. Yet, what is so striking is the way in which Caravaggio has painted what surrounds Paul: a horse, a man, a cloak. These banal, everyday presences are painted with such wonder and intensity that they seem not ordinary, but extraordinary. The horse's lifted foreleg and the man's standing leg are oceanic in their depths and their force. They are painted like a tempest might be painted. But after saying all this, here we still are in the zone which faces the too big. When we face the too big, are we not really facing the too brief? That's to say, ourselves, our minds, who have invented the measures, like light years, for measuring the bigness? You say this too. But what I'm hinting at is that the bignesses are our invention, are part of our being. Then, if we follow Spinoza and suppose that everything which exists is indivisible, because this everything constitutes a whole, we see the bigness as something surrounding us, including us, rather than confronting us. And this is the mystery that art strives to present to us. The figures which you are painting are messengers of this by their very presence, and their gestures show us or remind us of something we half know. We acknowledge and recognize the immense whole with our actions, gestures of solidarity and sharing. Such actions embody hope, which is as big, not by what it promises, but by its very nature, as the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. You still on the border? With all my love, Jay.
Me still on border. And where I stand, it happens to be a bridge. So I lean over and take a look down. My God, what a gap. It's true I can believe all is part of an immense whole. Gap, bridge, and me included. Just as I can say all that happens had to happen. And if I was as wise as the gap is deep, I would stick to that celestial point of view and its eternity. It's a name that's worth working for, as it is not a given. But my feelings often bring me down, and then the depth appears to be vertiginous, the parts all separated, the heart beating faster with excitement and fear. It's not a question of truth or reality, but rather a question of how we make an arrangement with ourselves in order to live, or more precisely, in order to stay alive. Recently, I saw the film Le Grand Bleu. I had seen it long ago, and something about it always stayed with me. Not that it's a great film, but in its way, it's about this zone we're talking about. The two main characters are free divers who push back the limits of their bodies by going down as deep as possible in the sea, using only their capacities for apnea. The longer they stay underwater, the deeper they go, the more dangerous it becomes. They are reaching and playing with a limit. At some point, one says, the hardest thing when you're down there is to turn around. You need a good reason to come back. And finally, the attraction of this limitless and dark world, 100 meters below the surface, is so strong, they offer themselves to it. I think I like to recall that film because I feel something quite similar when painting in the studio. And about Caravaggio's painting, you talk about an oceanic depth. The plant Jitka took a photo of, which you sent me, is called in French un amour en cage. Both the image and the name set us wondering, asking, how? How can it be? True names sometimes do this. They double the mystery of what they are naming with their own mystery. So if you look outside, you will see the witch hazel is in flower, next to the waking up strawberry plants and the still asleep walnut tree. Walnut literally meaning foreign nut. And equally, you won't miss the noisy magpies. Pie being the old French word for those birds, and apparently mag was a slang word to name qualities generally associated with women, like chattering. So now, after this dive in the sea and this walk in the garden, I leave you in the hands of a friend who's taking you to a party, a very special party, located, guess where? Love, Yves.
Dearest Yves, like you say, the question is of staying fully alive. Francisco took my arm and led me to the burial of the sardine. It's so pulsing with energy, that painting. We don't talk because he's stone deaf, and was when he painted it. Frankly, I don't think the subject of the popular feast of the sardine on the last day of Carnival, before the first day of Lent, is very important here. For Goya, it was another scene of human craziness. As I went on looking at it, I was overwhelmed by the din, by the noise, the incomprehensible noise the huge crowd is making. And I imagine that when you are stone deaf, there may be situations whose utter incomprehensibility is like a deafening noise. For those who are at the burial of the sardine, it's perhaps like a wild rock concert, but for us spectators, it's a senseless, continuous roar. As Goya said, the sleep of reason produces monsters. My God, look at what's happening in Israel and in Palestine. Every pomegranate is bleeding. I too remember the film Le Grand Bleu, and if I'm not wrong, what partly tempts the two freedivers to stay there in the depths and not come up to the surface is the silence. And so we have din and silence. Din obliterates explanations, and silence offers a continuous questioning present. Neither can help us much to be fully alive. What can? Maybe asking questions. And questions are not only verbal. When you are painting, you are asking questions one after another. The paradox about asking questions lies in the fact that the questioner believes that it may be possible to find or come upon an answer. And this is a kind of faith. A kind of faith which is totally absent in most church pictures, but which is there, for example, in Mirandi's Jugs and Bricks. No? Yes, it's true that names sometimes double or amplify the meaning of what they're defining. Sunrise, midday, dusk, nightfall, the small hours, tomorrow.
Papa, tomorrow, yes, today. I'm glad Francesco took your arm. It's true you've known each other for a long time. When you and Nella wrote Goya's last portrait, you spent many days and many nights side by side. I guess he hasn't changed since, as he is dead. But you've become an older man. Did you tell him about your difficulties about hearing and how your relation with sound has changed? I've always heard you address the old masters or writers or thinkers, men you admire and feel gratitude towards, as if they were comrades standing just there by our sides. Their physical absence, and most of them were dead long ago, doesn't make the slightest difference. What has been lost is insignificant compared with the ongoing presence of their lives. A presence established not only by the works they left, but by the intensity of their impulse towards what they saw. The number of ramifications between one life and others is incalculable, just as the shapes in which life exists are unpredictable. So it could be a game between us, of going to a rock concert with Goya, or of knocking at a door in the Via Fondaza in Bologna, and waiting for Mr. Morandi to open it. A game, a form of make-believe, but nevertheless not gratuitous. Like for kids, games are more real than most so-called reality. Let's go back for a moment to the burial of the sardine. I agree, Goya saw it as another scene of human craziness. But it's different from many others he depicted. Battles, fusillades, misery, hunger, illness, the domination and narcissism of the powerful, the absurd rules that held all that world together. All this cruelty of the human condition afflicted Goya deeply, so deeply he was considered insane.
Lucidity is dangerous, Francisco.
more than I can say. But here, at the burial, it's a carnival. People are playing, joking with and about human craziness. They take the Mickey out of their world. For a moment, they join Goya, for they recognize the same thing. They witness the same thing. But when they decide to laugh together, he turns around and starts crying.
Some of your paintings, Francisco, are made out of tears.
They didn't stop. I prayed in despair, but they didn't stop. To keep faith, as we face everything, to ask questions, hoping we may learn, to ask new questions in the silence or the din. Do we have another choice? Is there another way towards freedom beside this narrow path? I've lived here almost all my life, since father died anyway. My brother Giuseppe never saw this place. Later, Anna, Dina, Maria, and I found a way to arrange our lives in here. Protected from the terrible sunlight through din, and preserved from the obscurity which swallows everything in the unknown, the silence. Have a seat. This is my shelter. Aren't we lucky to be welcomed in this way by Mr. Morandi? In his small world, one can find all the space one can ever need. And I wonder if what makes it so hospitable is in precisely the faith with which Morandi painted his jugs and bricks. As if his hope can be found by listening to the conversation of things, as if we can remain in the company of things, remain in the company of a group of objects, even when they return to their isolation. In other words, as if something of us keeps living in the place we have left.
Mr. Morandi, you are the soul brother of Fra Angelico.
I've always dreamt of spending a night in one of his cells. Even thought I disliked leaving my home. In our library in Quincy, mon ancienne chambre, I hanged side by side 4 still lives by Sven. You see those small paintings on paper he did with oil sticks quite late in his life? I love them always more. Maybe because their fragility never fails. Fails to what? Tell me about your friend Sven Blomberg. What was his example and his faith? With all love, Yves.
Dearest Yves, oddly enough, I didn't tell Goya that, as an old man, I have become hard of hearing. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have the impression that he entitled one of his capriccios, "The Deaf Talking to the Deaf." In your old bedroom, there's a book of all his capriccios, and I also have the impression that you looked at this book when you were still very young. What you say about our artist predecessors seems to me right and important, that their impulse is even more encouraging than their works. And what their impulse signifies is their devotion to posing questions and to searching for partial replies. Yes, the carnival crowd are taking the mickey and putting their arms round Francisco and sharing his laughter. And after a moment, tears come into his eyes. It's intriguing that both laughter and loss provoke tears. I shut my pen and laid it on this sheet of paper, and when I looked next, it had done this. Curious. And my fingers are stained with Schäfer black. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that Schäfer in German means shepherd, Berger. In the photo you sent of Mirandi, he's, as you say, listening as much as looking. Listening to the conversation between objects, between two jars, between satellites and the earth, between a stylo and a clean sheet of paper. Philosophers search for answers. Artists seek and confront doubt. Scientists establish formula. Artists find metaphors. You ask me about Sven. What was his example and his faith, you ask. In his way of life, he was unique, and I've never met another painter quite like him. Perhaps he had a little in common with Giacometti, whom he admired and whom he had known when he first came to France in the late 1940s. He did not paint to produce paintings. His studio was an upper room in the outhouse of a tiny farm, and was scarcely larger than a garden shed. He never invited anybody to climb up into it. His finished paintings he took off from their stretchers and stacked in a vegetable loft for onions. His chosen way of life served his mystical love of nature. Although in appearance he didn't look like a mystic, but like an onion seller. His mystical love had something parental about it, as if nature was the mother of everything and, at the same time, a child who needed protection. And both roles implied a constant conversation. When he was painting, he was tending the land in another way. He had no ambitions about exhibiting or selling his work. If a friend wanted to buy a painting, he had a good many friends from Paris who came to visit him in Lacoste, and they mostly belonged to philosophical milieu around Garaudy and Merleau-Ponty. If a friend wanted to buy a painting, he would put a high price on it, but indicate that he was making a sacrifice because the painting would no longer be there. Otherwise he, Romain, and their daughter, Karine, contrived to live without money. For transport, he had a bicycle. Later, I got him a second-hand deux chevaux. For him, the act of painting was the act of kissing nature. But, as happens in kissing, perhaps nature was kissing him, her tongue thrusting towards his throat. He loved birds. They were like postmen. The real postman refused to drive down the 1-kilometer lane to his house, like yours to Vers-le-Mont. And he arranged a wooden box where the lane joined the tarred road. His one luxury was his library. He was very well read, and the library was the largest room. Poetry and philosophy. Both he and Romain would read whilst eating a meal, more often than not prepared by Sven. Perhaps this tells you something about his example? Over to you, with all my love, Jay. Let's begin with a painting by Zurbarán of St. Veronica's Veil. In fact, he painted two. One in which the head of Christ on the pinned-up veil is sharp and clear, and another one in which his head is like a whisper of an infant. The painting is in the Museum of Valladolid in northwest Spain. The experts reckon that this one is the second, later version that Zurbarán made. You can hardly see the features of the face, only the outline of his hair, his ear, and his beard. And I start wondering and asking myself, what is the relationship between the touch, the sense of touch, and the art of painting? In the Chauvet cave, beside the painted animals, there are the imprints of hands covered with the same paint. Paintings speak to our eyes, but they also speak to our hands and stimulate our sense of touch, don't they? A great deal of what we see and watch in life is untouchable, and the gift of the art of painting is to render such untouchable things touchable to the imagination of a spectator looking at a painting. When we are drawing something which is in front of us, our drawing hand often instructs our eyes, and our eyes follow the order received. John.
You offered me once a wooden frame without glass in which you pinned a black and white reproduction of the Zurbarán you're talking of. Against this wooden background, below the veil, you glued a little Arabic mirror with a blue metallic frame in the shape of an arch. And below that, a wooden Spanish fan open. With it came a little booklet of a bird in motion. When you flip its pages, the wings flap up and down. Remember? Today, as I was looking through the Zurbarán monograph we have, in the hope of finding the Valladolid version of the veil, I found there was a missing page, the one you had torn out to offer me. The relation between the sense of touch and the art of painting, you ask? I smile and feel I could shiver. Shiver because for me it's such a central question. A question that lays beneath all the others I have as a painter. So deeply, I could say painting is the touch made visible. The brush, as any tool, is an extension of the arm and the hand. Also, it has no nerves running inside it. When we are used to handling it, we feel what's happening between its hairs and the canvas with an extreme precision. When it's a question of choosing which brush to use, it all depends on how you want to touch the canvas. What kind of stroke? Hands paint, eyes correct. Hands can submit to eyes' decisions. Nevertheless, hands are free. They are free because the art of painting depends on their freedom. Shitao, the great Chinese master of the 17th century, says the origin of painting and calligraphy is celestial, whereas its achievement is human. Maybe celestial has to do with the sense of sight, and human with the sense of touch. I close my eyes and think of your back. I see it clearly. and no other back is like it, vast and round as a planet. But it's my hands who make the image clear, my hands who often massaged your back. If I think of somebody's back I have only seen and not touched, I can't see it clearly. It's like any other. This afternoon in the studio, when not painting, my eyes will take me to the wooden frame to touch the veil again. Love, Yves.
The studio filled with the sense of touch. Fleeting hands dipped in different colours. When I first went to art school, 1943, the first thing I had to learn was the name of all the pigments and whether they derived from plants or from minerals. Those that come from minerals intrigued me. Minerals had their origin in the creation of the universe. The Big Bang Theory had not yet been formulated. Minerals were there before life began. Their colours were there before any eye had evolved. Cobalt blue. Cobalt comes from the mineral silver. During our first year at the school, we were forbidden to use ready-made tubes of paint. We had to go to a colour merchant, buy the chosen powder and mix it ourselves with oils and turpentine and egg yolk. Fingering the cobalt powder, I had the impression of fingering a prophecy, which had awaited millions of years to be fulfilled. And now, I could apply it with a brush. Love, John.
Here is a photo I have as a background on the desktop of my laptop. I took it a few winters ago, when grinding the color I use most, white. I don't grind all my colors, but I do like to have my own pot of titanium white. I use a rather cheap ready-made white oil paint as a base, to which I add a lot of titanium pigments and just enough linseed oil to be able to grind the whole thing together. With my two hands on the glass Müller, I turn round and round in the shape of an 8, or the sign of infinity, until I reach the texture I want. A fresh, honey-like texture between solid and liquid. As my hands repeat the gesture on the marble table, my eyes gaze out the window. On the windowsill, I look at the jars of linseed oil which have been waiting here for years. The more daylight it takes in, the more secretive and better it becomes. Inside the jars, beneath the wrinkled skin that formed on the surface, the oil is a color of gold, a liquid transparent gold, again like honey when it comes out of the honeycombs. When my eyes raise slightly from the jars and focus on a further distance, I see the 3 beehives at the bottom of the garden. Whether it's a warm day or freezing way below zero, in the center of those little houses, down in the heart of the swan, the temperature always remains the same. As for a body that's crucial to their survival. After a while, grinding is like a dance. The movement of the hands and arms spread to the whole body. You get warm, stop from time to time for a break, or to gather in one place all the oily stuff that is spreading out all over the marble table. In front of the spatula you use to push the paint around, the mixture rolls like waves on the surface of the sea. Usually there's snow outside when I make my pot of blanc de titane. Fingering the white oil paint whilst looking at the landscape wrapped up in its white blanket is joyful. Maybe because it simply makes me feel part of nature. I grind as it snows. But if we compare the two colors, my white is heavy and yellowish, more like piss than honey this time. Outside, the white of the snow is so pure you think angel dust. With love, Yves.
I see your photo of the homemade titanium white. Ever since I first learnt the names of the pigments, titanium white appealed to me. Zinc white was for mechanics, flake white was for decorators, but titanium white suggested Parnassus, where the gods hang out. So no wonder you make the figure 8 with your palette knife. For me, the equivalent of your photo is something I'd name dictionary. Yet it isn't a dictionary at all. It's the same as what you talk about later. It has the form of a beehive, and all the bees in it are syllables of words, protecting the queen bee who lays the eggs of language. It's not a compendium of words like a normal dictionary. It's a maternity ward of words. This may seem strange, for language is, after all, an established achievement, an historical edifice. But for a writer, the language he writes in, if he's a good writer, is always unfinished, tentative, expectant. There are many references in what you write to honey, and I fancy that for us both, the house in Quincy and its identity was intimately associated, linked with beekeeping and the collecting of honey. The secret of the house was, and is, to be found in its honeycombs. Love, J.
Honeycomb. Repeat that word and harvest gold. Gold made liquid, gold made light. Repeat that word and return pure into paradise, into the womb. I often try to have gold in my paintings. Not real gold, but using a pigment named iriodine. Once applied, it shines depending on the light and the angle you look at it. I often try, but it rarely works out. Indeed, it tends to remain artificial. And in that sense, gold is like ideas in painting. It works better when you accept to lose them. Colors appear in the daylight, but what about them in the darkness of an inside? Can we imagine the color of honeycombs inside the closed beehive? Or the color of the muscles, organs, and blood inside a living body? Maybe all colors are multiple, and their range extends far beyond the capacities of our sight. Nevertheless, a painter must find his way through all and each of them. After more than 20 years of painting, the difficulty I'm facing is different than before. It's no more a question of getting at a painting that holds together, that works as a composition or an image. I know, after some efforts, how to get to that. No, the problem now is which image is worth keeping. Most of the time, I must admit, They don't deserve to remain visible. And so I work over, again and again, image upon image. A kind of endless process of recovering, but always driven by the hope that this one will be the good one. Eventually, often when despair grows upon hope, when my will surrenders in face of the reality of what's there, often when all ambitions are crushed and one is left completely idiot, when all the conditions meet, which is so rare, then a painting worth keeping comes to life. Something magic one can't really explain. I may need time to see what's there, time for my eyes to be freed from all they have seen and looked for on that specific canvas. I may need other eyes to confirm what is really there, like your eyes always did. Love, Yves. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, when Yves presented this to us some time back, Nikos remarked that I was speechless, but that is completely insurmountable to what was actually performed tonight. This was a really unique experience, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed giving it to you. But I want to thank Yves for all the work that he's done, both for this and the other lectures that we've put together. Having Isaac was an inspired choice, I thought, and Isaac told me that he was nervous beforehand, but Isaac, you did not miss a beat. You were absolutely fantastic, so thank you. There's a few other people that I just want to thank. I want to thank Nikos Papassiliadis for all his guidance, his mentorship and his deep friendship, the board of the Greek community for backing this event, our incredible staff here, George, Antonia, Meg, Costa, Michael, Astrini and Heidi. These events don't just happen. They happen with a lot of dedication and hard work, and these people put them on day in, day out, week in, week out, and every year. Yves has kindly consented to Q&A, so if there are any questions, he'd be more than happy to take them. The first one is from Nikos.
First of all, I want to say congratulations to Yves and to Isaac for this beautiful experience. You've managed to convey the feeling of not just you, Yves, being so far away, but being somehow close to us. But you've also managed to convey the feeling of John being in the room. And furthermore, you've also managed to convey the feeling of what you and John always strove to achieve. That thing that you tried to make when you drew together. I want to ask you two simple questions, Yves. You did a lot of drawings of John and with John. You wrote a lot of letters to John and received letters from John. What is the difference between the letters and the drawings? And when did you stop drawing and writing to John?
Thank you, Nikos. Well, first, just before replying to your questions, I want to just to come back and say how moving it is for me to do this reading with Isaac, because I really feel the voice of my father is really carried in such a way. It's really alive and with us, which I usually feel, but inside, and here it's expressed outside and shared, and so I feel very grateful for that moment. And now to reply to your questions, the difference between the when we draw each other or write to each other, it's not so different, in fact. It's a question of temporality, which is different. But both acts demand the same kind of listening. That's to say, to try to respond what's there in front of us. May it be the face of the other, the presence of the other, or his words and his presence in his words. It just happens on a different time scale. But otherwise, it's profoundly, I think it's very similar. And also for us, in our family or in our relation, that was very natural. A very natural thing to do. Yeah, as I was talking of the snow falling on the landscape, very natural. And after you ask, when did we start drawing?
Did you stop?
Or writing? Stopped.
Or have you continued in your own way?
No, we kept exchanging letters right till the end of his life. Drawings, no, because he was in Paris and I was here. So I think the drawing we showed you at the end of the lecture was amongst the last I did of him, alive. Because, of course, I drew him also when he was dead in his coffin, as we drew together my mother when she was in her coffin. So, in a way, that continues beyond the ending of life. And yeah, I feel our exchange, our still continues in a different mode. Yeah, the companionship is not stopped by the physical absence.
Any other questions? The young man.
John often writes about the amount of time and the importance of the time it takes to look at something closely to get a better understanding of what it is that we're actually seeing. We're now being bombarded by images every instant, and we're kind of being trained to take at a glance the meaning of something. What do you think are the dangers of an entire generation being trained to briefly glance at something rather than think about it and kind of let it soak in?
It's true. It's completely true that painting, but not only painting, it's true of almost anything, demands time to be, things don't come to you just in a flash, in a click. And it's true also that in our society today, there's always this fast mode of feeding, more than feeding, I don't know the exact word in English, but bombarding, you said, people with images and slogans and things. And a lot of other tools we use increase that kind of threat. But still, I don't think it changes much from before, in the sense that I have faith that people will still manage to find ways on the side to take the time needed to really meet an artwork, a flower, a place, a person. I mean, quite quickly a question joins to a kind of political question. So I don't know if we really want to step in that field, but to be very brief, yes, the world we're living in is crazy and going nowhere except at its end. But I believe that there's many resistance which can be opposed to that, and I have hope in that resistance. And this question of time you're talking about is crucial to that resistance. I don't know if I replied really well, but...
Anyone else? While we have Yves here? Well, I think that's... there's no other question, Yves, so I think
okay.
You're
that's
done.
Fine.
Thank you once again, and until we meet next time.
Thank you, all the team that put up this event and creating this very special occasion.
Wonderful. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you. Take care. Have a nice evening.